My best friend helped me through divorce. He was sleeping with my wife. When my marriage started falling apart, my closest friend became my emotional support. I later discovered he wasn't helping me heal. He was replacing me. The slow reveal makes the final confrontation devastating and unforgettable. The night I realized my marriage was already over, my best friend was sitting beside me, telling me everything was going to be okay. I remember the way the ceiling fan clicked unevenly above us, like it had a limp. The living room smelled faintly of stale coffee and the lemon cleaner my wife used when she was anxious. I was slumped on one end of the couch, elbows on my knees, staring at a crack in the wall that looked like a crooked river. He sat close, too close maybe, but I didn't notice then. All I felt was the weight in my chest and the strange relief of not being alone. "She just needs space," he said softly. "You've been under so much stress. Anyone would pull back." I nodded, because nodding was easier than thinking, easier than admitting I didn't know who my wife was anymore. Before everything unraveled, my life was ordinary in a way I used to take pride in. We weren't flashy, we didn't post perfect photos online. We had routines, quiet ones. Sunday morning pancakes, the radio humming low, her bare feet padding across the kitchen tile. I worked long hours at a mid-sized logistics firm, and she managed a small design studio from home. We talked about kids someday, always someday, like it was a room we'd walk into when we were ready. And then there was Mark. Mark had been my best friend since college. We met during freshman orientation when he offered me half of his sandwich because I looked lost. He had this calm confidence, the kind that didn't need attention. When I married my wife, he stood beside me as my best man, adjusting my tie because my hands were shaking too much. He was there for every promotion, every setback, every half-baked idea I had over cheap beer. So when my marriage started to crack, when conversations turned into silences and silences into absences, Mark was the one who showed up. It began small. My wife started coming home later than usual. Her phone was always face down. She laughed less, sighed more. When I asked how her day was, she gave me summaries instead of stories. I told myself it was stress, deadlines, life. One night, after a quiet dinner eaten in front of separate screens, she said, "I think we need some time apart." The words landed gently, like a feather, but they crushed me all the same. She moved into the guest room. I stayed up late, listening to the house breathe. Every sound felt amplified, the fridge cycling on, the hum of the streetlight outside, the faint murmur of her voice through the wall when she was on the phone. That's when Mark started coming over more. He brought takeout when I forgot to eat, sat with me while I stared at nothing. He didn't push advice, he just listened. Sometimes he put a hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. "You still cares about you," he'd say. "People get lost, doesn't mean they don't want to be found." I believed him because I needed to. My wife, on the other hand, seemed lighter. She smiled at messages I couldn't see. She started wearing perfume again, the one she used to save for special occasions. When I asked where she was going, she said, "Out with friends," and kissed my cheek like she was doing me a favor. I noticed Mark knew things before I told him, that she had a hard day, that she was thinking about a weekend away. He said she mentioned it in passing once, probably while they were all out together. It made sense. They'd always gotten along. Still, something in me shifted. One evening, I came home early and heard laughter in the kitchen. Her laughter, soft, unguarded. When I stepped inside, it stopped. She was alone, stirring a pot, cheeks flushed. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "No one." Later that night, Mark texted, "You holding up okay?" I stared at my phone longer than necessary, feeling a strange, creeping cold. I told myself I was imagining things, that grief makes you suspicious, that trust, once cracked, makes ghosts out of shadows. Mark was helping me survive the worst moment of my life. That's what I told myself. I didn't know yet that while he was holding me together, he was quietly stepping into the space I was losing, and I had no idea how much it was going to cost me to finally see the truth. The first real crack in my denial came on a Tuesday afternoon, quiet and unremarkable, the kind of day that usually slips through memory without leaving a mark. I had left work early because I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred on the screen, emails stacked up unanswered. On the drive home, rain tapped against the windshield in uneven rhythms, and I remember thinking how everything lately felt offbeat, like a song playing just a half second too slow. When I pulled into the driveway, my wife's car was there. That shouldn't have meant anything. She worked from home. She came and went. But something in my chest tightened anyway. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and cinnamon, fresh, not hours old. 2 mugs sat on the counter. One was hers, the other wasn't mine. I stood there longer than I should have, coat still on, listening. Voices drifted from the back of the house, low, familiar. Mark's voice. I didn't freeze. I didn't confront anyone. I walked in like I belonged there, because I did, because this was still my house, my marriage, my life. When I stepped into the living room, they were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, too far apart to look suspicious, too stiff to look natural. "Oh," she said, standing too quickly. "You're home early." Mark smiled, easy and practiced. "Hey man, just checking in." I nodded, forcing my face into something neutral. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," my wife said, too fast. "We were just talking." Talking. That word started to feel elastic, stretched thin from overuse. Mark left soon after, clapping my shoulder on his way out. "Call me later, okay?" That night, I lay awake replaying the scene in my head. The way her hair was tucked behind her ear. The way Mark avoided my eyes. The mugs in the sink, rinsed but not washed, like someone planned to come back to them. I didn't say anything. I didn't accuse. I told myself I was exhausted, paranoid. But once a thought takes root, it doesn't need encouragement to grow. Over the next few weeks, patterns emerged. Mark and my wife seemed to orbit the same moments, always just missing each other when I was around, always somehow connected when I wasn't. If she was out late, Mark would text me before I asked. If I vented to him about something she'd said, he'd already know. "She's scared," he told me once, as we sat in his car outside my place, the engine idling. The way he said it, gentle, intimate, felt wrong, like he was speaking from inside the problem instead of outside it. The real turning point came one evening when my wife said she needed the house to herself for a few days. "Just to think," she said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, eyes tired but resolute. I packed a bag and went to Mark's place. It made sense. It felt safe. The guest room smelled like laundry detergent and something else I couldn't place. I slept poorly, waking to the sound of Mark on the phone in the next room. His voice was low, careful. "I miss you too," he said. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening to the silence that followed. Then a soft laugh, a pause. "I know, be patient." The next morning he acted normal, made coffee, asked how I slept. I didn't confront him, not yet. I needed certainty. I needed proof that I wasn't destroying my own life with suspicion. So I started paying attention. I noticed the way my wife guarded her phone like it was a fragile thing. The way Mark suddenly had excuses when I called. The way my wife stopped mentioning him altogether, like removing his name would erase him. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the dresser. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but I picked it up. The message preview was enough. "Can't stop thinking about last night." No name, just a heart emoji. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen. The conversation opened like a wound. No explicit pictures, no graphic words, just intimacy, familiarity, shared memories that didn't belong to me anymore. In-jokes, late-night plans, a life unfolding parallel to mine. Then I saw his name, Mark. I sat on the edge of the bed while the shower ran, the sound suddenly too loud, too intrusive. My chest felt hollow, like something essential had been removed without anesthesia. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, she froze when she saw my face. "You went through my phone?" she asked, defensive before guilty. I held it up. "How long?" She didn't answer right away. Her silence said more than words ever could. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she finally said. "You were so distant, and he was there." There. That word echoed in my head. I thought of every night he'd sat beside me, every reassurance he'd given me, every moment he told me to hold on. I handed her the phone, my fingers numb. "I need air," I said. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked out into the night, the cold biting through my jacket, my phone vibrating in my pocket as Mark's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer, not yet, because if I was going to confront him, I needed to understand how deep the betrayal went and what kind of man I was dealing with. I didn't go back inside that night. I walked until my legs burned and my thoughts went quiet, until the familiar streets blurred into something anonymous. The city felt indifferent in the way only cities can. Cars passing, lights changing, People moving forward with their own lives, untouched by mine. Mark kept calling. I let it ring, again and again. By the time I finally stopped, I was sitting on a park bench, the wood damp with cold. My phone buzzed one last time, then went still. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise ever had. I didn't want explanations yet. I wanted the truth in its full shape, not trimmed down to something easier to swallow. So I started asking questions without asking them. The next morning, I called in sick to work. My voice sounded wrong in my own ears, flat, distant. I drove past my house instead of pulling in, circled the block like someone casing a place they used to live in. Mark's car wasn't there. I parked a street away and waited. It felt pathetic, sitting there with a cold coffee and too much time. But I needed to see something real, something undeniable. Around noon, her car pulled out of the driveway. 10 minutes later, Mark's did too. They drove separately, careful, strategic. I followed at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. They met at a small cafe across town, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. I watched through the window as they sat close. Closer than friends. His hand brushed her wrist. She didn't pull away. That small gesture hurt more than anything I'd read on her phone. I didn't go in. I didn't confront them in public. I went home instead, my home, and packed more than a bag this time. I took my clothes, a few books, the framed photo from our wedding that I couldn't bring myself to leave behind or throw away. When Mark finally called that evening, I answered. "Where are you?" he asked, concern layered thick in his voice. "Not at home," I said. "We need to talk." There was a pause. I could hear him recalibrating, choosing words like tools. "I know," he said quietly. "I was going to tell you." "Tell me what?" I asked. "That you were sleeping with my wife while telling me to fight for my marriage?" Another pause, longer this time. "It wasn't like that," he said. "It just happened." That sentence, so small, so careless, lit something cold and steady inside me. Everything just happens when no one wants to take responsibility, I said. My voice surprised me, calm, controlled. "When did it start?" He exhaled. "A few months ago." Months. While he sat on my couch, while he told me I wasn't alone, while he watched me unravel. "I trusted you," I said. "I let you into the worst part of my life. I never meant to hurt you," he quickly said. "She came to me. She needed someone. And I didn't?" I asked. Silence. That was the moment I understood something important. The betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the rewriting of the story. In their version, I was already replaced, not just as a husband, but as a human being whose pain mattered. I met Mark the next day at his place. Neutral ground, he'd suggested. He looked tired when he opened the door, older somehow. "I'm not here to fight," I told him as I stepped inside. "I just need you to hear me." He nodded, eyes downcast like remorse might absolve him. "You don't get to be the hero in this. You don't get to be my support and my replacement." "I know," he whispered. "I trusted you with my grief. You used it as an opening." He flinched, but he didn't deny it. I didn't threaten him. I didn't beg. I told him I was done, with him, with the lies, with the version of myself that accepted scraps of truth because I was afraid of being alone. When I left, I felt strangely lighter, not healed, not even close, but clear. The divorce papers came quickly after that. My wife cried when she signed them, said she never meant for things to end this way. I didn't argue. Endings rarely look like what anyone intends. What I didn't expect, what none of them expected, was that the truth wouldn't stay private for long, that secrets, once exposed to light, have a way of moving on their own, and soon it wouldn't just be my heartbreak on display. The truth has a strange momentum once it's set free. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post cryptic messages or call mutual friends to explain myself. I moved into a small, furnished apartment across town and focused on the mechanics of survival. Work, sleep, paperwork, silence. But people noticed. They noticed because my wife stopped wearing her ring, because Mark stopped showing up to weekly basketball games, because I stopped answering group texts that had once felt like home. Questions came quietly at first. "Are you and Sarah okay? Hey, haven't seen Mark around. Everything good?" I kept my answers short. "We're divorcing." I needed space. It was my wife who broke the silence wider. She told her sister first, then her parents. Then slowly the version of the story that made it easiest for her to sleep at night began circulating. That we'd grown apart, that the marriage had been over long before anyone else knew, that Mark and I were barely speaking anyway. What she didn't count on was how small our world actually was. Her sister called me one evening. We'd always been cordial, never close. "I just wanted to hear it from you," she said carefully. "Is it true?" I looked around the apartment. Bare walls, a single lamp, the hum of the refrigerator filling the pauses. "Yes," I said, "it's true. Mark and Sarah were seeing each other before we separated." She inhaled sharply. "How long?" "Months." There was a long silence. Then, quietly, "I'm so sorry." After that, the calls didn't stop. Friends reached out not for gossip, but for confirmation. I told the truth without embellishment. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't defend myself either. I just stated facts and let them sit where they landed. Mark tried to get ahead of it. He sent messages asking to talk, to explain himself to others together, like damage control was a group project. I didn't respond. The social consequences weren't explosive. They were slow, heavy, and unavoidable. He stopped getting invited places. People who once trusted him with their own secrets began keeping their distance. At work, his easy confidence dulled. Mutual friends looked at him differently, not with rage, but with recalibration. Because betrayal like that forces people to reassess their own safety. My wife felt it too. Her parents were polite but distant. Her mother cried the first time she saw me after everything came out, holding my hands longer than necessary. "This isn't how we raised her." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. One afternoon, weeks later, Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't answer the door. He looked thinner, less sure. "I didn't expect it to turn out like this," he said, standing in the hallway like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome everywhere else. "That's usually how consequences work. She's having a hard time. Everyone's judging her." I met his eyes then, really looked at him. "You're still doing it," I said. "Doing what?" "You're centering yourselves, turning fallout into injustice. You didn't lose friends because people are cruel. You lost them because trust matters." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm just not here to protect you anymore." He nodded slowly, like someone finally understanding a language they'd been pretending not to hear. After he left, I sat on the floor for a long time, back against the couch, breathing through something that felt like grief loosening its grip. The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no raised voices, just signatures and a judge who'd seen this story too many times to be surprised. The last time I saw my wife, she asked, "Do you hate me?" I thought about it, about the nights I'd spent unraveling, about the friend I'd lost along with the marriage. "No," I said honestly, "but I don't know you anymore." That answer seemed to hurt more than anger ever could. As the dust settled, something unexpected happened. People didn't treat me like a victim. They treated me like someone who had survived something with integrity. And in that space, between pity and praise, I began to feel something steadier than either. Respect. Not because I'd won, or exposed anyone, or come up on top, but because I hadn't become someone I didn't recognize in the process. And that, I realized, was its own kind of justice. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, quiet, unannounced moments that didn't feel important until I looked back and realized they were carrying me forward. The first night I slept through without waking up felt like a small miracle. I noticed it only because the morning light was already spilling across the floor when I opened my eyes. No tight chest, no replayed conversations, just silence and breath. I started walking again, not to escape anything this time, but to feel my body move with intention. Early mornings, before the city fully woke up, the air smelled cleaner then, honest. I listened to my footsteps, the rhythm grounding me in a way words never had. I rebuilt my routines slowly, cooking meals instead of ordering takeout, calling my parents more often, letting friends sit across from me without feeling like I had to explain myself or be okay for their sake. Some nights were still hard,
certain songs, certain streets, certain memories that arrived without warning and stayed longer than I wanted them to. But they didn't knock me flat anymore. They passed through like weather. I learned something important in that season. Closure doesn't come from apologies you'll never get. It comes from telling yourself the truth without softening it. The truth was this: I had loved deeply, I had trusted fully, and I had been betrayed in a way that cut across two relationships at once. But the truth was also this: I didn't abandon myself when it mattered most. Months later, I ran into Mark by chance at a grocery store. We stood in the produce aisle, both pretending to examine avocados like they held answers. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He looked different, not broken, just diminished, less certain of the space he occupied. "I hope you're doing okay," he said. "I am, and I meant it." We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. Some conversations end not because they're resolved, but because they no longer belong to you. As for my ex-wife, I heard through mutual connections that things between her and Mark hadn't lasted, that the foundation they'd built on secrecy couldn't hold the weight of real life. I didn't feel vindicated when I heard that, just sad in a distant way, not for myself, but for the choices that lead people to confuse escape with love. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand myself better, why I ignored certain instincts, why I equated patience with loyalty, why I believed love meant enduring everything quietly. I learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks, and you're allowed to decide who gets a key. A year later, my life looks different, smaller in some ways, calmer. There's a steadiness now that I protect fiercely. I don't chase certainty in people who offer confusion. I don't hand my pain to those who haven't earned my trust. And I don't romanticize suffering anymore. What happened to me didn't make me stronger because it hurt. It made me stronger because I faced it without becoming bitter, without rewriting myself into someone I didn't want to be. If you're listening to this, and you're in the middle of something similar, feeling supported by someone who might not have your best interests at heart, please hear this. Pay attention to how people act when your vulnerability is on the table. Real support doesn't blur boundaries. Real care doesn't need secrecy to survive. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who sit beside you when you're at your lowest and quietly take your place. But even then, you are not defined by what was taken from you. You are defined by what you choose to rebuild. I didn't get my marriage back. I didn't keep my best friend. What I gained instead was something harder to earn and easier to lose: self-respect. And that has made all the difference. Would you have confronted them the same way I did, or walked away sooner? If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, quiet, honest, and human, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel.